The Flute in the Woods. This happened when I was 18, and I'm 22 now. I live in San Antonio, Texas. It was my senior year of high school, right when COVID-19 started shutting everything down. Even though we were supposed to be in quarantine, my friend group and I were going out more than ever. There wasn't much to do, but I've always loved urban exploring, checking out abandoned places or haunted spots. I'm not one to scare easily, but one night, I experienced something so strange and creepy that it still gives me chills. Around this time, I started talking to a girl named Clarissa. We'd had a class together in high school, and even though we were still in the early stages of dating, I somehow convinced her to explore a wooded park with me at 3 a.m. The park, called O.P. Schnabel, is relatively safe and scenic during the day, but at night, it's a different story. Police usually block the entrances at night to keep people out, and there's a history of violence, like the murder of a young woman in 2016 and a shooting in 2021. Clarissa and I arrived at the park around 3 a.m. It was pitch black, with the trees blocking most of the moonlight. I didn't use my flashlight because I didn't want to draw attention to us. We were about 15 to 20 minutes into the main trail when I suggested taking an off-road trail that looped back to where my truck was parked. Clarissa agreed, and we started walking down the narrow, overgrown path. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a flute playing. It was eerie, a soft, rhythmic melody that sounded like it belonged in some kind of Irish jig. Clarissa froze, trembling and on the verge of tears. I tried to stay calm, but the sound was getting louder, like it was closing in on us. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from. It seemed to surround us. Clarissa started praying, begging God to save her. That's when I knew we had to get out of there. I told her we'd run down the off-road trail to escape. We took off, but after about 30 feet, we heard rustling in the bushes. Something big dashed across the trail right in front of us. I didn't see a silhouette or shape, just felt the rush of wind and heard the snap of twigs. It could have been a deer, but it didn't sound like one. We turned around and bolted back toward the main trail. As we ran, the flute started playing again, louder than before. It felt like it was right on top of us. We sprinted down the main trail, adrenaline pumping, and made it back to my truck in record time. The flute stopped, and we sped away, shaken to the core. The next day, I told my friends about what happened. I searched online to see if anyone else had experienced something similar, but I couldn't find anything about a flute playing in the woods at night. There are houses near the park, but they're miles away, and the sound was too clear to have traveled that far. To this day, I have no idea who, or what, was playing that flute. I still explore creepy places, but I've never gone back to those woods at night. The hospital hallucination. I'm a 20-year-old pharmacy technician at a hospital in northwest Alabama. I work the night shift, from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., and I'm also in charge of stocking the surgery rooms. One night, during my 6th shift in a row, I left early to stay with my wife at her aunt's house. She was babysitting her little cousins and felt uneasy being alone in the house, which didn't have curtains. I arrived around 5 a.m. and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I'd been awake for over 24 hours, and my insomnia was kicking in. I ended up falling asleep in the car for about 10 minutes before heading to work. My wife drove me because my brakes were bad, and I didn't trust myself to drive after being awake for so long. At work, I was stocking the surgery rooms when I heard the door open behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. A little later, I saw someone hunched over the sharps bin, digging through it. When I turned on the light, the person was gone. I brushed it off as exhaustion and kept working. Around 2 a.m., I was delivering medications to the nurses' stations. The 5th floor was undergoing renovations, so the 54-55 side was empty. As I walked down the hallway, I heard a rattling sound. I looked into one of the rooms and saw an old man having a seizure, blood running down his face. A monitor was beeping frantically. I stepped back, then looked again. The room was empty. The bed was made, and the monitor was off. I hurried back to the elevators, and when the doors opened, the same old man stepped on. He patted my shoulder and smiled as the doors closed. I watched the elevator go up to the 5th floor, then come back down empty. I ran back to the pharmacy and sat there until my wife picked me up. As I left, I looked up at the 5th floor window and saw the old man staring down at me. I still don't know if it was a hallucination or something paranormal. Either way, it felt real, and I haven't seen the man since. The intruder. I live with my boyfriend in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. One weekend, he was away in Vegas for a bachelor party, and I was alone. On Friday night, I had some friends over for a wine night. We were watching scary movies when the doorbell rang. We all froze, and I went to check, but no one was there. We brushed it off as a prank. Later that night, around 1 a.m., the doorbell rang again. I called my boyfriend, and he told me to stay in the bedroom and not open the door. I tried to calm down, but then I heard a knock on the window. A man's voice said, "Hey, anyone home? I need some help out here." I called the police, and they arrived within 10 minutes. The officers were dismissive and rude, barely checking the property. They left, and I went back to bed, but I didn't feel safe. The next night, after a Halloween party, I came home to find a window open and the basement door wide open. I heard a clicking sound coming from the basement, and then a voice said, "You're finally home." I slammed the basement door shut and ran to my neighbor's house to call the police. The same officers returned, but this time, they were more thorough. They searched the house but found no one. I packed a bag and stayed with my sister until my boyfriend came back. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. The lesson: always lock your windows.